Welcome back to Approaching Infinity, the show where we focus on all things finance, innovation, and technology. Today, I'm pleased to introduce Mr. John Mossop. He's the Vice President of Technology and Energy Transition at Dril-Quip, where he has spearheaded the development of sustainable energy solutions, including CUUS, hydrogen, and geothermal markets, scaling and building a $75 million revenue pipeline. He is also the founder and CEO of Momentum X, a firm dedicated to energy and sustainability consulting, providing strategic insights and leadership to navigate the dynamic forces shaping global energy markets. Finally, John is a visionary leader, accomplished strategist with over 20 years of experience transforming R&D functions, aligning product strategies with market needs, and driving growth in the emerging energy sectors. His work continues to pave the way for innovation and sustainability in the global energy transition. John, welcome to the show. Anything I missed?
No, I think you pretty much covered that there, Justin, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
No, thank you for joining us. When we were prospecting guests, we wanted to dive a bit more into guests who've had a myriad of experience in the energy sector. And based on your experience as a VP, going through energy transitions and guiding companies towards this process and through this process, we thought your insights here would be extremely valuable for providing insights on how to get a company through energy transition. What does the future look like? And where is the market heading for this? So on that note, I'll let you take it away. Let's start off with the hero's journey. More or less, where did you come from? How did you start this? And where are you going?
Yeah, sure. Look, I think the first things to say is, I've had a great career so far. It's long from finishing, I hope. But, it's taken me to various parts of the globe. It's taken me into different industries. I started as effectively an undergraduate at a pressure sensing company in the UK, as you can, tell. Even though I live in Houston now, I'm from out of town. So, I did my degree in engineering, mechanical, electrical engineering. Ended up working at a pressure sensor company in the city of Leicester in the UK. Really some great formative years there. I did an undergraduate program with them. I did a postgraduate program with them. That company was ultimately bought by General Electric in around about 2002, which for me was fantastic. It gave me access, from a family-owned company, albeit public, to a large conglomerate and multinational. Now, so, I applied my engineering trade across various industries, the general industrial. I looked at aerospace, I looked at subsea, I looked at, one of the coolest jobs I probably had was developing sensors for Formula One racing. And as I say, anecdotal on that, one day we came in on a Monday morning to find a bag of bits. We'd actually stopped one of them with my Michael Schumacher car on the Sunday. But that was probably one of the coolest experiences I had. I went through the ranks there, ended up leading teams, got a real passion for leading teams and developing people as well as myself. I got the opportunity to then lead some cost out efforts across General Electric, across a $2 billion company called Measurement and Control, actually Measurement and Control Solutions at the time. That became $4 billion, measurement and control. So pressure, temperature, flow, inspection technologies, did a reasonable job there and got asked onto a corporate program called the Corporate Technology Staff, which was really there to set up, the next technology leaders within General Electric at the time, supported very heavily by the then CEO and Chairman, Jeffrey Melt. So that got me, around the globe a lot. I spent some time in GE Healthcare looking at MRI machines. I spent some time in GE Power looking at, model-based design, model-based enterprise, 2D to 3D environments. I spent some time in the Middle East with GE Oil and Gas as it was then, looking at innovation in line with customer requirements. And then finally, some time at the Global Research Center in just outside of New York, looking at, digital twin technologies and how do you accelerate the adoption of. I rolled off that into a global engineering role in the oil and gas business, predominantly around subsea controls. So, the electronics, the mechanics, the software that goes under the sea that controls, the valves, the flow rates and the like for subsea infrastructure. I was in the services business for a while. I then got products and services, and then moved back into some sort of, margin expansion, cost out type roles as the business needed. And then got the tap on the shoulder to move to the US. Which should have happened in 2020, but not a lot did happen in 2020. And, I started at a company called Dril-Quip. Again, very small company, but kind of taught me that you can get things done quicker and, in a more agile and nimble environment. I was a product manager there, so I moved from engineering into the more commercial marketing side, which was a revelation as well. I then started to get, the questions around, so what's this thing called the energy transition? So, we go and think through that a little bit. We then led into the vice president role that I got to lead the technology and the energy transition roles. So how do I kind of link the technology side to the energy transition side, and then how do we grow business from there? Over 25 years, it's been a great journey. As I said, it's not stopped yet. It's brought me to the US. We intend to stay in the US now. I thoroughly enjoy it here, and we'll see where the next, hopefully 25 takes us, right?
Okay. That's incredible. I mean, you started out from a deeply technical background, traveled around the world, worked in F1, some truly unique experiences, and then now you're here. That's an incredible journey. I do want to touch on the first topic, the energy transition journey, right? So we want to figure out some strategies for traditional businesses and how they can pivot to sustainability. So perhaps as your work as the VP, like how did you help transition the current business or model at Dril-Quip into a more sustainable model? And then how do you think that can be applied to other businesses as well?
Yeah, so I vividly remember the conversation that kind of started this all off. It was just before Christmas, I think, at the end of 2020. And the conversation came from a wise guy that hired me. So what's this thing called the energy transition? Let me think about that. So you have the Christmas period to ponder it, to research a little bit. And I think when I came back from that Christmas period, that Christmas holidays, the thing that struck me was, how do we start to dissect the core capabilities of the company that you work for? And I think as I started to think through that, you start to get to, well, ultimately at heart, we're a mechanical engineering company, right? So how do we start to think about mechanical engineering expertise and capabilities? How does that apply to energy transition markets? We actually started to engage with some global consultants and started to educate ourselves with this view of how do our capabilities in the markets intersect? And, at that point, we looked at, wind, we looked at solar, we looked at, carbon capture utilization storage, we looked at hydrogen, we looked at tidal, we looked at wave, we looked at geothermal, and really took a broad view of, so where could we be successful? And it really all boiled down to, we were a company that fundamentally plugs holes in the ground, right? And controls pressure and controls flow. So, the way I would describe the company at the time was a mechanical engineering company that works offshore. So, you think, okay, so, if I think of wind and solar, probably something that, wasn't necessarily going to meet the capabilities that we had, even though we could do quite large fabrications, it would take quite a shift for the company to move in that direction. So you then start to think about, well, okay, we need to remove CO2 from both the process and the environment. So we need somewhere to be able to store that. So that was really the first focus of, we're a subsea wellhead company, right? We plug holes in the ground. We could be part of the ecosystem that allows you to store CO2 underground. So then, you start to explore that market. Then you move on to, well, actually, geothermal is very similar, right? You know what I mean? You're putting something under the ground, you're bringing it back up again, you generate energy. So there's another market. Then start to think about, well, hydrogen is very similar, right? To the point where hydrogen at some point needs to be stored, right? It also needs to be created, and we can talk a little bit more about the creation as we go. It probably needs to be stored. So it gives us three markets that we can start to look at. The one that was a little bit of an outlier was, methane being, a potent greenhouse gas. I think it's 80 or 85 times more potent than CO2, although CO2 is more abundant. We also have valves and actuators. Hey, valves and actuators leak. Why can't we start to think about utilizing our mechanical engineering capabilities to target that market as well? So it's all about leveraging the strengths. And then from there, as I say, taking a broad view of, okay, well, here's where we want to focus. Let's understand each market individually. Let's start to talk to people that know more than us. And bearing in mind, at that point in time, we're in emerging markets where probably outside of geothermal, which was known, although, techniques and technologies were starting to evolve, these other markets were evolving. So you got to be involved in some of the thought leadership of that pretty early on by trying to leverage your network, trying to engage with people that hopefully knew more than you or knew a little bit more of a subset of the market than you did. And then you can start to throw out some ideas. So that all boiled down to, so actually we need to understand, so who's going to be the end customer? How do we walk back from the end customer? How do we understand who we're going to serve? And how do we understand the requirements that are needed to serve that market? So, I think kind of in summary, it's, we focused down on core capabilities. We leveraged our strengths. I think we were pretty successful in leveraging our strengths. There were some nuances of that we can talk about as well. But really trying to gather that network and the community around it really helped us, double down over the course of the next 12 to 18 months to then start to get some fundamental purchase orders flowing back through the business.
Yeah, I know that's an incredible case study too. And just correct me if I'm wrong too. So starting off, it was essentially, you understood the business model, right? Plugging holes in the ground. This is how our bread and butter. And then from there, you saw parallels, right? Like how you mentioned, you started off figuring out the strengths and then going in towards parallels. Like you can also do hydrogen this way. You can also do geothermal this way. And then leveraging your network and the strengths, you're able to expand those business lines into what you have today. And you did that relatively quickly.
Yeah, but I think the fundamental, we ran with a small team as well, so we kept it pretty lean. Very early on, I hired a product manager to come and work. A guy that had already kind of worked with me and knew me, and we had a great understanding. And I hired him into the capacity of, look, help me understand this market. This is as we were starting to expand, and my responsibilities were expanding as well. I also hired a business development guy, and I was very conscious that I wanted that to be outside of the US and be in Europe. And so I hired a guy in Aberdeen, a really great guy that helped us with boots on the ground, talking to the customers. I think part of that dynamic that we built, which was around how do we get fast feedback? How do we pivot based on customers' conversations? How do we try to help a customer understand what the problem is? All really helped in the traction that we drove. So, keeping it tight, keeping it very interactive. We had between the three of us, we had a great dynamic. And I had an organization at that point that was probably 60, 70, 80 people strong. So this is only a very small subset, and I'm really proud of what we generated and what we created. Without that, boots on the ground, being out every day, touching and feeling, I don't think we'd have been as successful as maybe we were.
That makes perfect sense too. A small, agile team with the passion, I'm guessing, to get after this, get boots on the ground. And then, like you mentioned earlier, like you're adding value to your end customer over time and proving that value. So I think that's a really key and important point you made there. Thanks for detailing the process. I think that provides a lot of color for our audience, how the process started, how it's going, and kind of where it can go and how it could be applied to other business models. On that note, I do want to focus more on your bread and butter, right? So for our audience into like innovation in emerging markets and perhaps scaling this next generation technology. So CUUS, right? Carbon capture, utilization and storage, hydrogen, and geothermal. Do you mind explaining the nuances behind those markets, how they interplay with one another? Essentially what they are?
Yeah, sure. So I think the first thing to say, right, is all of these markets, I think, have one thing in common, right? And it's that they need to find a way to be economic with what we've got today. We've got fossil fuels today that provide us, with the energy that the world needs. I don't think that's going away. I think we have to be responsible with how we utilize and abate, the negatives that come out of fossil fuel. But it ain't going away. So, it's also it's the most economic fuel that we've got today, right? So how do we compete with that? So if I think about CCUS, carbon capture, utilization, storage, let's drop the utilization right now. Utilization, I think, is down the line a little bit. How do we capture and use it and then start to create energy from that, right? But, market very much today is around, so how do I capture and how do I store it? And if you look at the economics of that whole value chain, right, you've got in the US, you've got an Inflation Reduction Act as of today that says for every ton that you store, I'll give you $80 in tax credits. So, your break-even point needs to be $80. You've probably got a market now that's, probably breaks even at a 125, 130, and these numbers may be wrong and may fluctuate. In Europe, you've got carbon markets that generally kind of go around that 90 to 100 euro kind of mark, right? So it's all kind of in the same realm. So you break down that value chain and you say, well, actually 75% of the cost is, roughly 75% of the cost is around the capture process, right? These are generally capital intensive projects. The equipment that is being used or the infrastructure that's being used is well known. So there's room for innovation to try and get at that $80 a ton magic number that we're trying to get to. So that's, where I think the industry is focusing, right? But where we were focusing was more on storage, right? And when we're very early on said, look, capture isn't really for us. It's a chemical business. It's a rotating equipment business. Doesn't really meet with our capabilities. But if you think about the 25% that we focused on, the storage piece, a lot of talk on the offshore realm of, drilling oil and gas, you need to be going at high temperature, high pressures. Carbon dioxide is low pressure, low temperature. So it's the exact opposite. So rather than trying to, deal with temperatures 300F, 350F, you try to deal with temperatures that are, probably in the realms of the 30s, right? Maybe a little bit lower depending on the phase of the gas that you're dealing with. The pressures aren't high, but the temperatures are low. So that gives you a little bit of a different dynamic when you're designing, method fields, elastomeric fields to try and keep CO2 in the pipe as you're pumping down, right? So there's the first challenge and really the fundamental challenge of how do I deal with that? How do I deal with it at cost? So, I can strip out metal. I can think about different sealing techniques. I can start to think about, what history has taught us as we've gone up in pressure, right? What does it teach us when we were thinking about the lower pressures, right? So there's to me, the fundamental challenge. There's also a metallurgical challenge as well, which is, CO2 when it gets wet, gets very corrosive. So, you talk to some customers and they'll tell you that don't worry about it, we'll keep it dry, right? And some of the specifications that are coming out of Europe is, I think 98%, 99%, purity of CO2 or dryness of CO2 as well. It doesn't necessarily affect pipe, which allows you then to think about pipelines and the like that maybe uses carbon steel, right? However, in my view of the world, as this industry develops, it's going to get dirtier. So then what I mean by that is it's going to get wetter. So you have to then find different metallurgical solutions that wouldn't necessarily provide you with that corrosion issue as you get, more corrosive CO2 running through the pipeline. So I think that's the challenge if I think about CCUS.
And those innovations are still in work?
Those innovations are still in work, right? You've got projects that are starting to go on, Northern Lights out of Norway.
I see.
It's a subsea pipeline, government backed, so it does need the subsidies to survive. It's more of a pilot, let's call it, right? Or quite a much pilot. UK is doing some, we're doing some in the US now for pure purposes of storage. So, you're going to see this economic start to be driven downwards as we go. You think about geothermal, again, it's probably high pressure, high temperature, so it's the other end of the extreme. However, some of the technologies that are now starting, the techniques that are now starting to come into that, things such as what's called advanced geothermal system, EGS, which is effectively taking the fracking technologies that were developed in the US and starting to create their own fissures within rock so that then, I can start to get to deeper, hotter rock, right? So therefore I can start to circulate water through. So again, for us, the challenge is at the upper end of the scale, where economics still being the case of, you need to have an economic solution that's ultimately going to challenge the fossil fuel industry. You think about hydrogen, that's probably the one that's maybe lagging a little further. And I'm a believer in hydrogen. And I think I always will be as a fuel for a long distance trucking, buses, right, transportation, that type of thing. But again, hydrogen then brings its own problem of once you get it into a hydrogen form, you've got a small molecule. So therefore you're trying to seal it with a really small molecule. So each has got their own unique nuance that you need to try and solve. We were pretty successful in the North Sea with some hydrogen storage capabilities and some testing that we actually did out here in the Texas area showed that actually the technology that we've got is capable of surviving small molecules, right? So, which was pretty encouraging. But then it still comes back to economics, right? depending on whether you talk about the renewable version of green or whether you talk about the version where you dispose the CO2 blue, right? You're at $10 a kilogram versus $4 a kilogram, and really you need to be less than $2 a kilogram to be, at least within spitting distance of fossil fuels. So there's a way to go, but these innovations are coming through all the time. But as I say, for me, the fundamental part is it's all about economics of the solution. Focus on the economics of the solution, and I think we'll end up with a mix of energies for future generations that will be well beaten.
That makes perfect sense too. And thank you for detailing all three of those processes out so thoroughly. And I wholeheartedly agree, right? I'm glad the innovations and efforts are ongoing. The technology, I'm hoping, is close, even though you said some are further away than others, but the problems are actually still being worked. But for the problems to continuously be worked on, right? And to, pay the upfront for the R&D, these economies have to scale. The numbers have to make sense. And figuring out that optimization, I think, will be crucial to the future, in a sense.
Yeah, and I think you're exactly right. If you take solar and wind as an analogy for this, right, that over the last 10 years has, had a lot of governmental support globally. You're now seeing it's got the scale, right? We see wind farms everywhere. We see solar farms everywhere. Offshore winds, I think it's probably the next fleet. And I think, certainly probably Europe will take the lead there, I think, from a point of view of how do we drive the economics down. So, I think to me, if I look out into the next 4 or 5 years, gas is important. And when I think about gas, I think about CO2, I think about methane, right? I think about, how do we start to leverage governmental support to deal with a CO2 byproduct and start to make that economic, as we've started to see that solar and wind has become economic over the last 10 years, and there's still probably got some runway to go.
That's reassuring and good to hear. I do want to move on to the final topic, like perhaps some key lessons learned throughout your career, throughout these efforts that would perhaps enable a more sustainable future or allow us as a society to meet global energy needs.
Yeah, I think the first thing, right, is, we have to keep that open dialogue, right? And, I think as generations come and go, we're seeing a generation now that's a lot more conscious of the environment that we live in than maybe generations in the past. So I think that's naturally going to start to ebb into organizations. There's probably more of an environmental care and environmental stewardship today than there probably ever was. So I think that helps, right? Because it kind of helps focus on what the goal is here, which is, ultimately we need a mix of energies that's going to sustain us for future years. Fossil fuels are not limitless, so therefore we need others. A lot of talk in the US administration about, geothermal and nuclear. We haven't necessarily talked about nuclear. It wasn't necessarily a focus of ours, which I think is great as well. So goal focused on, so what's the mission here? We want sustainable energy at an affordable cost. And I think that's, in my mind, the one thing that I take forward, right? I think the other thing, we touched on earlier was having great talent. And as I say, what we drove, even though with the backing of a public company, and I won't take away the backing from the public company. I had a great CEO, a great CFO that supported us wholeheartedly with what we wanted to do here. But putting the talent in the right place that kind of believe in the mission was important. And as I say, that boots on the ground and trying to get that message out was really fundamental to what we've done. Because I think that then drives more of a cultural dynamic, right? And in this, I see it, it's kind of a startup culture, right? You've ultimately got to think about how do I get that feedback really quickly to be able to then shift my feet. How fast can I shift my feet to the changing trends of the organization and the industry? How do I communicate that in a way that makes sense? Because let's face it, not everybody's going to agree. And that's great, by the way, right? Because, I think dissenting views allow you to get a better solution. So I think that's, one thing that I take away over this last 18 months is the more people in the room that can kind of poke holes in what you're trying to do, constructively, allows you to get to a better solution. And it allowed us to try things and fail and, and as I say, shift our feet. So I think there's a ton of lessons that we've taken, but without that, that core group of, like a couple of guys that, look, if they rang up now and said, I need help, I'd help them, right? You know what I mean? We walked over hot calls together. And I think that's part of it as well, right? Is how do you create that culture and that dynamic that ultimately allows you to get that open and transparent nature, right? That you need within this type.
I agreed too. I like how you summarized it, where the ultimate goal is to have a variety of energy sources that at a cheap cost, that allow us to more or less enable a sustainable future. And to do that, right, working on these technologies, we need to inspire the next generation or current generation to get after these problems, to work on these get after these solutions, so to say. And then, because the future, it does seem like you agree, you have to adjust or change the culture, or it even seems like it's going that direction to a more sustainable. And hey, we need to figure out these problems and able to make that sustainable future. Don't know if I worded that properly, but
No, but you're exactly
hopefully I
right.
captured
Right.
the gist of that.
You did. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you again, John, for providing your insights. We do like to do this thing when we're nearing the end of the show. If you had any lessons learned, words of wisdom, or advice for the audience, regardless of topic, is there anything that comes to mind that you're willing to share?
Yeah, I got one pivotal moment, right, in my career. And we were I was an oil and gas guy. I was an industrial guy, and I got asked to go into the GE healthcare business to look at how do we effectively lean out the installation process on magnetic resonance imaging machines. I couldn't really spell MRI at that point in time, right? And I remember being a weekend, and a very good friend of mine now runs the GE aviation business in Mexico, right? We were coming out of the elevator in Milwaukee. I think it was around about minus 30 degrees F outside, right? So pretty cold. And he just shot across my bowels and said, "You've got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable." And, I hear a lot of people saying that, but that to me was kind of the eyes rolled, the eyes kind of widened, and I thought, yeah, you're right. You know what I mean? Life's uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable. That's the way that you grow. So I've always embraced that. I've told that particular gentleman several times that I appreciated that feedback, but he was exactly right. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yeah, simple, effective, and one completely just understand all the context just from gleaming that.
Yeah, exactly
Well
right.
said.
Exactly.
Well, John, I want to thank you again for joining us on another episode of Approaching Infinity. And to our audience, cheers. And until next time, thank you again. Take care now.